The transit hub on Orvon Station had seen most things. It had seen a Drivari merchant try to smuggle 17 live creatures through customs by hiding them inside a ceremonial hat. It had seen a fuel line rupture on Level C that redirected half a corridor's worth of travelers into a storage bay for 4 hours, during which time 2 people fell asleep, 1 couple got engaged, and someone ate an entire bag of salted grain crackers without offering to share with anyone, which was considered the greater offense. It had seen arguments conducted in 11 languages simultaneously, reunions so emotional they blocked foot traffic, and at least one individual who had been sitting near Gate 7 for so long that the cleaning crew had begun routing around him out of respect. Orvon Station had accommodated all of this with the particular patience of infrastructure that has no choice. What it had not seen, or had not seen in quite this configuration, was Saya. She had positioned herself near the central boarding gate at precisely the time she had calculated foot traffic would peak, which meant she was surrounded on all sides by the compressed and mildly irritable energy of people who were late, people who were early and anxious about it, and people who had long ago made peace with the fact that interstellar transit was mostly waiting with occasional movement. She stood in the middle of this with the composure of someone who had prepared for it, which she had, and she offered a flyer to every person who passed within reasonable reach, which was a great many people. Most of them took one because she offered it before they had time to decline. She was tall, with the kind of stillness that read as confidence from a distance and as something more precise up close, the stillness of someone who moves only when they have decided to. Her hair was dark, worn back without ceremony. Her ears came to a gentle point, rising just past where a human ear would have ended, and she had the habit of tilting her head slightly when she was listening, which made them catch the light in a way that several people noticed, and then decided not to mention. Her expression as she distributed the flyers was one of calm, professional focus, the expression of someone executing a plan they have thought through carefully and see no reason to be embarrassed about. Daniel noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the pattern of a place, not because she was alarming, but because she was deliberate in a space full of people trying to get through it as quickly as possible. He took the flyer because she held it out to him, and he had been raised, in the specific and durable way of certain kinds of upbringings, to be polite to strangers. He was already 3 steps past her when he looked down at it, slowed, and stopped entirely, which caused the person behind him to make a sound of moderate displeasure and redirect around him like water around a slow rock. The flyer was printed on pale material, clean-edged, formatted with a clarity that suggested someone who found ambiguity wasteful. It introduced itself without preamble. It explained that its author was seeking a partner. It described, in ordered and unhurried language, what this meant to her, and what she was not requiring it to mean: no species specification, no age bracket, no list of preferred qualities beyond a stated and underlined preference for honesty. It noted that she was currently based on Orvon Station, but was not fixed to it. It included contact information at the bottom, formatted correctly for 3 different communication networks. It was, Daniel thought, the most organized thing anyone had ever handed him in a transit hub, possibly anywhere. He read it again in case he had misread it. He had not misread it. He looked up. Across the moving current of travelers, she was watching him with the patient attention of someone accustomed to observing how people respond to direct things. She was not smiling, exactly. She was waiting, which turned out to be more interesting. He thought about folding the flyer and putting it in his bag, which was what most people around him appeared to be doing. He could see 2 of them being discreetly deposited into the nearest waste receptacle, which he found he didn't want to do. Instead, he folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, mostly because that was where he put things he intended to actually think about. She noticed. He could tell she noticed because something in her expression moved. Not dramatically, not in the way of someone performing a reaction, but in the specific, small way of someone who has been paying close enough attention that a single detail lands correctly. It was, he would later think, like watching a very precise instrument register something. His gate was across the hub. His layover was 3 hours, which he had been regarding as a problem since his connection had been rerouted through Orvon 6 days ago by a scheduling algorithm that someone somewhere had clearly optimized for everything except the convenience of the people using it. He stood in the middle of the boarding hub with a flyer in his jacket pocket and 3 hours he hadn't asked for, and he watched her offer the next one to a large being in a transit authority uniform who took it, read the first line, and handed it back with an expression that suggested he had not read the second line and was not going to. She accepted it back without comment and moved on to the next person. Daniel adjusted the strap of his bag and turned, not toward his gate, but toward the small cafe on the hub's east side, which had 4 empty seats and a view of the central boarding area and absolutely no other significance whatsoever. The cafe on the east side of Orvon Station's transit hub had, at some point in its history, made a decision about coffee that it had never revisited. The result was a beverage that arrived in the cup looking plausible and smelling approximately correct, and then delivered, upon first contact with the tongue, the specific disappointment of something that had tried and not quite succeeded. It was the kind of coffee that made you understand, on a cellular level, why some civilizations had abandoned the practice entirely and moved on to other things. Daniel was on his second cup because the first one had surprised him, and he had needed to confirm it wasn't an accident. It was not an accident. He was sitting with his back to the main thoroughfare, which meant he saw her reflection in the curved interior panel of the cafe wall before he saw her directly. A tall shape, moving with the unhurried purpose of someone who had already decided where they were going and saw no need to perform uncertainty about it. She came to the table, looked at the empty seat across from him with the brief assessing glance of someone checking a fact, and sat down. She put her remaining flyers on the table between them in a neat stack, squared the edges with 2 fingers and looked at him. He looked at her. The cafe produced a distant sound of something being steamed that did not improve matters. "You sat where you could see the gate," she said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation delivered in the tone of someone noting a detail they found worth acknowledging. "The other seats were taken," Daniel said. She looked around the cafe, which was approximately 1/3 full, with several unoccupied tables positioned at various distances from the gate and the window and each other. "Most of them weren't," she said. "No," he agreed. Something in her expression did the small, precise thing it had done before, out on the floor of the hub. She picked up the menu from the edge of the table, examined it with the attention of someone hoping to be proven wrong about something, and set it back down. "The coffee," she said, "is a problem." Daniel looked at his cup. "I'm on my second one." "I know, I watched you order it." She said this without any suggestion that she found it unusual to have been watching. "I've been on this station for 11 days. I've had the coffee every morning because the alternatives are worse, and I keep hoping it will improve, which is not a rational position, but is apparently the one I'm committed to." "Has it improved?" "It has not," she said. "It has, if anything, gotten more confident." He laughed before he had decided to, which was not something that happened to him frequently. She observed this with interest, the way someone might observe a piece of equipment behaving in an unexpected but not unwelcome way. A server passed. She ordered the coffee without looking up, in the resigned tone of someone ordering a thing they have made peace with. Daniel ordered a 3rd cup on the grounds that he was already committed and the situation couldn't meaningfully worsen. It could slightly worsen. It did. "You read it twice," she said. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "I wanted to make sure I'd read it correctly the first time." "Had you?" "Yes." She nodded, which seemed to satisfy something. "Most people don't read it at all. They take it because it's easier than declining, and then they put it away before they've looked at it. A few read the first line and hand it back. You read it twice and then kept it." It was very well organized, he said, which was true and also not the full reason, but it was the part he could explain without having to account for the rest of it yet. I revised it 4 times, she said, with the directness of someone who does not find this embarrassing. The first version was too long. The second was more concise but lost something in the middle section. The third had a structural problem I didn't catch until I'd already shown it to someone, which was irritating. The fourth is what you have. Daniel considered this. Outside, through the cafe's wide observation panel, a mid-range hauler was making its way toward the docking arm with the slow, graceless determination of something very large that had given up on elegance and was focusing on arrival. Beyond it, the dark between stations held its usual quantity of stars, indifferent and precise. "Can I ask," he said, "why the station? Why here specifically?" "I'm here for research," she said. Orvon sits at the intersection of 4 major transit corridors. The volume and variety of beings passing through it in any given cycle is significant. She paused. It seemed like a reasonable place to look. "For a partner." "For a partner," she confirmed, without any change in tone that suggested she found the repetition uncomfortable. He turned his cup in his hands. The coffee inside was lukewarm now and no better for it. Through the observation panel, the hauler had completed its docking approach and disappeared behind the station's outer arm, leaving only the dark and the stars and the slow movement of a smaller craft making its way outbound, running lights blinking in the patient rhythm of something that had somewhere to be and was heading there. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I know," she said. "Your boarding pass was visible when you took the flyer. I didn't look on purpose, it was simply there." She picked up her coffee. "I'm Saya." He nodded. She drank. The coffee was, by any measurable standard, not good. Neither of them left. The boarding delay announcement came through the hub speaker system in the flat, uninflected tone that station AIs reserved for information they knew would be unwelcome. 3 hours, it said. Cause under assessment. Updates to follow. It offered no apology because it had not been programmed to mean one, and everyone in the hub understood this and was annoyed anyway, which was the standard arrangement between Orvon Station's transit management system and the people who depended on it. Daniel heard it, checked his boarding information on the small display panel embedded in the cafe table, and confirmed that yes, his connection was among the affected routes, and that the 3 hours he had already not known what to do with had now become 6, which was either a problem or something else depending on how you chose to look at it. He looked across the table. Saya had also checked her information, on a device she wore on her wrist that was considerably more sophisticated than anything available in the station's commercial district. A research-grade communicator, he noticed, with a display that projected slightly above the surface of the skin rather than sitting on it. Thin lines of light organizing themselves into data she read with the quick, practiced eye of someone accustomed to processing a great deal of information in a short time. "Your route," she said. "Delayed," he confirmed. "Yours." "I'm not leaving today," she said. "I have 11 more days on my station permit." She lowered her wrist. The display folded itself away with the quiet efficiency of good engineering. "So the delay is only a problem for you." "It's not really a problem," he said, and meant it more than he expected to. She looked at him with the direct, assessing attention he was beginning to recognize as simply how she engaged with things, not rude, not invasive, but present in a way that most people weren't, as though she had decided that if she was going to be somewhere she was going to be entirely there. "Tell me why you fold things before you put them away," she said. He blinked. "What?" "The flyer. You folded it along the original crease before you put it in your pocket. You do the same with your boarding documents. I watched you refold them after you checked them just now. It's a consistent behavior. I'm curious about the reason." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, "I don't think anyone has ever asked me that." That seems like an oversight on their part. He considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "My father was a cartographer," he said finally. Old style, he worked with physical charts for planetary survey teams. He said a fold in the wrong place could misrepresent a coastline. He was very particular about it. He paused. I think I absorbed it. Saya was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone storing information carefully. That's a more complete answer than I expected. You asked a more specific question than most people do. I find general questions produce general answers, she said, which are less useful. Outside the cafe's observation panel, the station continued its business. A passenger liner was making its approach to the upper docking ring. Vast and slow and lit along its hull in the pale blue that the Verath Collective used to designate civilian transit vessels. Daniel recognized the configuration from his route work, a long-haul carrier running the outer corridor circuit, the kind of ship that people lived on for months at a time, and developed strong opinions about the quality of its internal atmosphere regulation. Beyond it, two small customs craft were running a parallel intercept pattern on something coming in from the unmapped side of the system, moving with the focused efficiency of official business. Your research, he said. What is it actually about? Pair bonding across species and cultures, she said, without any of the hesitation that the subject seemed like it might warrant. Specifically, the gap between what beings report they want in a partner and what they demonstrably select when given the opportunity. The gap is, she paused, significant and consistent across most species studied. How significant? Considerable enough that I've begun to wonder whether the reporting is sincere, or whether beings simply haven't examined their own preferences carefully enough to describe them accurately. She turned her cup on the table. My working hypothesis is the latter, but I'm still gathering data. And the flyers are part of the research. The flyers are part of the research, she confirmed, and also sincere. Both things are true simultaneously. She said this in the tone of someone who had anticipated the follow-up question and was addressing it before it arrived. I don't find them contradictory. Daniel thought about this. Most people would lead with one or the other. Most people find transparency uncomfortable, she said. I find the alternative more uncomfortable. Ambiguity has very poor load-bearing capacity. He laughed again, and again it arrived before he'd organized it. She watched it happen with the same quality of attention as before, not detached, not clinical, but genuinely interested, as though the specific way a person laughed told her something worth knowing, which he suspected for her, it did. On my planet, he said, there's a long tradition of not saying what you mean directly, and then being upset when people don't understand what you meant. I'm aware of it, she said. I've read extensively on the subject. I found it, she considered the word, poignant, also inefficient, mostly poignant. It causes a lot of problems. The data supports that, she said. And yet the behavior persists across generations, which suggests it's fulfilling some function that the problems don't outweigh. She tilted her head slightly, her ears catching the cafe's overhead light. What function do you think it serves? He didn't answer immediately, because the question was real and deserved a real answer. And outside the observation panel, the customs craft had completed their intercept and were escorting something toward the secondary docking bay. And the station's speaker system was announcing something in a language he didn't have and Saya apparently did, because she listened to it with brief attention and then returned to him without explaining what it said, which somehow didn't feel like withholding. I think, he said slowly, that people say things indirectly because if no one understood them, it hurts less than if they said it plainly and still weren't understood. Saya was quiet for a moment that felt different from her other quiet moments, more considered, less analytical. That, she said, is the most precise thing anyone has said to me on this station, including in your research interviews, including in my research interviews. The coffee had gone entirely cold. Neither of them had touched it in some time. The hub outside moved and shifted and announced things, and the stars through the observation panel held their positions with the reliability of things that had been there long before the station, and would be there considerably after. And Daniel thought that 6 hours was, actually, a very reasonable amount of time. The gate update arrived the way bad news usually does, quietly, embedded in routine, formatted in the same neutral font as every other announcement so that it didn't feel like a particular cruelty until you had already read it. Daniel's connection had been rescheduled. Not delayed further, not canceled, but pulled forward into an earlier slot that the system had opened up by reorganizing 3 other routes in a way that the scheduling algorithm had apparently decided was optimal, and that Daniel, looking at the new departure time, decided was the opposite of that. 40 minutes. He looked at the display panel. He looked at the number. He looked at Saya, who had seen it on his face before he said anything because she was, as he had established, someone who paid attention to things. "Your route," she said. "Moved forward," he said, 40 minutes. She received this information without visible distress, which he found simultaneously steadying and difficult to read. She looked at the display he'd angled toward her, confirmed the time, and then did something he had not expected. She reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a small, flat notebook, physical rather than digital, with a dark cover worn soft at the corners from use. She opened it to a page that was already partially filled with notations he couldn't read from his angle, and she set it on the table between them. "Then we should be efficient," she said, and the word didn't feel cold when she said it. It felt like someone clearing space for something that mattered. He looked at the notebook. "What is that?" "I find it easier to think through logistics when I can see them," she said. "It's a preference I've had since I was young. My colleagues find it archaic." She uncapped a pen, also physical, also worn, and wrote something at the top of a fresh section of page. "Your route goes where after here?" "Marin Outpost," he said. "Then the Delev Belt stations. Then back through the central corridor. It's a circuit. I inspect cargo routing infrastructure on behalf of the Transit Authority. I'm on Orvan because the system sent me here, and I'll be on Marin because the system will send me there. And somewhere in the next 4 months I'll be back in a hub that looks approximately like this one, drinking coffee that is hopefully better." She was writing as he spoke, not transcribing exactly but noting, in the shorthand of someone organizing information rather than recording it. "Your circuit, it's fixed, or does it have variability?" "There's a base route, but about 30% of it adjusts based on where the authority needs inspections. I have some input." He paused. "Some." She nodded and drew something that might have been a rough representation of a transit corridor, or might have been something else entirely. "I have 11 more days on Orvan. After that, my posting moves to Verath Station. That's on the outer arm of the collective's network." She marked a point on whatever she was drawing. "Then I have a research symposium on Delev Prime in approximately 8 weeks. Daniel went still for a moment. "Delev Prime," he said. "Delev Prime," she confirmed and looked up. "The Delev Belt is on my circuit." "I know," she said. "You mentioned it." He looked at the notebook. He looked at her. "You're mapping this." "I'm seeing if it maps," she said, which was a different thing, and she said it with the precision of someone for whom the difference mattered. There's no point in a conversation about whether something is possible if you haven't first checked whether it's possible. Outside, through the observation panel, the station's outer docking ring had taken on the busy, slightly chaotic quality of a peak transit period. Ships of 3 or 4 different classifications moving through the approach corridors in the carefully managed sequence that Orvan's traffic system, maintained with the humorless dedication of software that had never once had to actually be on one of the ships it was directing. A long-range explorer vessel, the kind fitted for deep survey work beyond the mapped corridors, was holding in a slow parking orbit off the far docking arm, waiting for clearance that the system was apparently not ready to give it, its hull marked in the pale gold of independent research registration. Daniel watched it and thought about circuits and corridors, and the particular mathematics of schedules that were almost but not quite impossible. "The communication relays between the outer arm and the belt," he said. They're inconsistent. I've had dispatches take 4 days that should have taken 4 hours. The relay infrastructure in that region was last upgraded 9 years ago, she said, without looking up from the notebook. I've accounted for a delay buffer. She said this in the tone of someone who had, in fact, accounted for a delay buffer, and he believed her completely. You've already been thinking about this, he said. I've been thinking about logistics since you sat down in a seat with a view of the gate and told me the other seats were taken, she said. She looked up then, and there was something in her expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same general territory. I find it useful to think ahead. And if the schedules don't actually work. She considered this with the genuine seriousness of someone who doesn't dismiss inconvenient questions. Then they don't work, she said. That would be useful information too. She turned the notebook slightly so he could see it better. What she'd drawn was cleaner than he'd expected, 2 rough route lines, his and hers, moving through a sketched framework of station points, with 2 places where they came close and 1 place where they intersected. He looked at the intersection point. That's Deliv Prime, he said. In approximately 8 weeks, she said. Give or take your scheduling variability and a reasonable relay delay buffer. He sat back in his chair. 40 minutes had become 35 while they weren't watching it, which was the other thing bad news did. It kept moving after it arrived. He should be at the gate in 20. He was aware of this the way you are aware of something you are choosing not to be governed by yet. This is a very practical approach to something that most people handle very differently, he said. I'm aware, she said. The more common approach involves a great deal of feeling things in an unorganized way and hoping the logistics sort themselves out, which they statistically do not. She capped her pen. I prefer to sort the logistics and then feel things, which I find more efficient and equally sincere. And the feeling things part, he said carefully, is that also in the notebook? She looked at him for a moment. No, she said. That part is here. And she said it simply, without drama, and he understood that she meant the conversation, and the cafe, and the cold coffee, and the 40 minutes that were now 33, and all of it. And he found that he had nothing efficient to say in response, which she appeared to understand without requiring him to explain it. She tore the page from the notebook with care, folded it once, and held it out to him. He took it. He folded it along the original crease and put it in his jacket pocket next to the flyer. She watched him do it and said nothing, and the nothing she said was one of the more complete things he had heard all day. They walked toward the gate together because there was no reason not to, and because the hub's main thoroughfare was busy enough that walking beside someone was structurally easier than walking apart from them, and because neither of them suggested otherwise. These were the reasons Daniel would have given if asked, and they were all true, and they were not all of the reasons. Saya had her bag over one shoulder and the remaining flyers under her arm, held against her side in the neat, unthinking way of someone who had been carrying them all morning, and had stopped registering them as an object requiring management. She walked at a pace that matched his without appearing to calibrate it, which he noticed and filed alongside the other things he had noticed about her, and was still organizing. The hub moved around them in its usual fashion, loud, layered, operating on the particular frequency of a place that never fully stopped. A group of Drevari travelers were navigating the central corridor in a loose formation, their transit cases floating behind them on magnetic tethers, bumping gently into each other and into passing strangers, with the cheerful indifference of luggage that had been given too much autonomy. A station vendor was arguing with his inventory management system, in a voice that suggested this was not their first disagreement today, and would not be their last. Somewhere above them, a child was communicating strong feelings about something in a language Daniel didn't have, with a volume that suggested translation was unnecessary. "Can I ask about your ears?" he said. He said it in the way she had identified earlier, the way of someone who was actually curious rather than performing curiosity, and she heard the difference, because she always heard the difference. "Yes," she said. "Do they? Is it a hearing difference, or is it something else? Pressure, she said. I sense atmospheric and gravitational pressure variations more acutely than humans do. It's useful in certain environments. In transit hubs with inconsistent atmospheric regulation, she paused, selecting the word with the consideration of someone who had several available, noticeable. Orvan's regulators are famously bad, he said. I know, she said. I noticed within approximately 4 minutes of docking. By the end of the first day, I had mapped the 3 worst fluctuation points on this level. She glanced at him sideways. The cafe where we were sitting is adjacent to one of them. Is that why you ordered the coffee without looking at the menu? You'd already been there. I'd been there 6 times, she said. The coffee doesn't improve with familiarity, but the pressure near the east wall is more stable than the rest of the hub, and I find it easier to work there. Daniel considered this, the image of her at that table, alone, on each of her 11 mornings, with her research and her notebook and her bad coffee, in the specific spot she had identified as the least uncomfortable, working steadily through something she had thought through carefully enough to print 200 copies of. That's a very complete picture of 11 days, he said. I pay attention to places, she said. It helps to know where you are. They had reached the outer edge of the central corridor, where the gate branches split off in 4 directions, each marked with the color-coded signage that Orvan used to manage the volume of beings who would otherwise simply walk toward wherever seemed plausible and hope for the best. His gate was left. She stopped where the corridor divided, naturally, without making a production of it. He stopped beside her. The remaining flyers were still under her arm. He looked at them, and then at her, and something in the looking was a question he hadn't put into words yet. She looked down at the flyers with the expression of someone checking on a thing they had already made a decision about without quite announcing it to themselves. Then she put them in her bag, not with ceremony, not with any of the significance the gesture might have carried in a different kind of story. She put them away the way you put away something you no longer need to be carrying, with the same tidiness she applied to everything. He didn't say anything about it. She didn't explain it. The understanding moved between them in the efficient, unspoken way of something that didn't require translation. The relay delay buffer, he said. How much did you build in? 48 hours, she said. If the infrastructure performs at its documented average rather than its documented best, which it historically does not. That's conservative. I prefer conservative estimates, she said. They have a better completion rate. He adjusted the strap of his bag. Down the left corridor, his gate was visible, the cluster of travelers, the status display, the particular quality of waiting that collected near departure points like weather. He had 16 minutes, which was enough and less than he wanted. The navigation error, he said, the one that put you on the wrong moon. What happened? She had mentioned it in the cafe briefly, and he had stored it the way he stored the things she said, carefully, with the intention of returning to them. I was early in my research posting, she said, with the tone of someone who has made peace with a story but still finds it instructive. I was using a third-party transit system that had not updated its navigational charts to reflect a boundary reclassification that had occurred 4 months earlier. The moon I arrived on was correct by the old charts. By the new charts, it was in a restricted survey zone. She paused. I spent 9 hours in a very small customs facility explaining to a very patient official that I had not intended to enter a restricted zone, while a research drone I'd sent ahead of me orbited the correct moon, running its survey protocol, completely unaware that I was not there. Did it complete the survey? It did, she said, thoroughly and without incident. The data was excellent. She considered. It was a more competent trip than I was having. He laughed, full and genuine, and she watched it with the warm attention she had been watching him all morning. The quality of someone who finds a particular thing valuable and doesn't feel the need to explain why. My first solo inspection, he offered in the spirit of the exchange. I filed my route completion report for the wrong station, not a similar station. a station in a completely different sector that I had never visited, which became apparent when my supervisor noted that the infrastructure I had described in detail did not exist on the station I claimed to have inspected, but did exist, accurately, on Pelion Hub, which is 11 transit hours away and where I had apparently been, mentally, the entire time. "What did you do?" "I filed a correction," he said, and then I thought very carefully about whether cartography was hereditary. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one, something warmer and more private than a laugh, something that felt like it didn't happen often and wasn't performed. He heard it and kept it. 14 minutes. "Saya," he said. "Yes," she said, and waited with the patience of someone who does not fill silences because they are uncomfortable with them, but leaves them open because something might need the space. "The contact information on the flyer," he said. "All 3 networks." "All 3 work," she said. "The third one has the best relay compatibility for outer corridor communication. I'd suggest starting there." He nodded. He looked at her and she looked back, and the hub moved around them in all its noise and motion and indifference, and none of it was particularly relevant. "Conservative estimates," he said. 8 weeks. "Give or take," she said, "the variables." He adjusted his bag one final time, which was something he did when he was ready to move and also when he was not, and turned toward the left corridor and his gate and the 40 minutes that had become, without his permission, a dividing line between one kind of day and another. He boarded with 2 minutes to spare, which was not how he usually boarded things. Daniel was, by professional habit and personal preference, early to gates. He had spent 4 years inspecting transit infrastructure across 11 station networks, and the single consistent lesson that work had given him, above routing efficiency and pressure seal tolerances and the structural inadequacy of third-generation docking clamps, was that the one time you were not early was the one time it mattered. He had a boarding philosophy. It was sensible and he believed in it. He had stood at the corridor division for longer than the philosophy recommended, and he did not regret it, which was its own kind of information. The transport was a mid-range connector, the kind that serviced the shorter legs of major circuits, functional, adequately maintained, possessed of the particular interior atmosphere of a vessel that had carried a great many people who had not been especially glad to be on it. He found his seat, stowed his bag in the overhead compartment with the automatic efficiency of someone who had performed this action more times than he could accurately estimate, and sat down. The passenger beside him was a Drivari in a transit authority uniform who was already asleep, which Daniel respected. Across the narrow aisle, 2 researchers were arguing in low, intense voices about something involving a dataset that one of them felt the other had misattributed, and the other felt was a matter of perspective, and neither felt was going to be resolved before Marin Outpost. The transport's internal systems ran their pre-departure cycle in the background, the soft percussion of pressure checks, the brief dimming of cabin lights that indicated a power transfer to primary drive, the small lurch of magnetic docking clamps releasing that you felt in your back teeth if you were paying attention. Daniel was not paying attention to the docking clamps. He took the flyer from his jacket pocket. The original one, from the hub floor, folded along its crease, worn slightly at the edge from having been put away and taken out and put away again across the course of a morning that had arranged itself very differently than he'd expected. He unfolded it on his knee and read it a third time. It said exactly what it had said the first time. It was still thorough, still direct, still formatted with the clarity of someone who found ambiguity wasteful. The contact information was at the bottom, 3 networks, the third one recommended for outer corridor communication. He looked at it for a long moment in the way you look at something when you are not really reading it anymore, but are instead thinking about the person who wrote it, and the 11 mornings at a table near a pressure fluctuation point, and a notebook with worn corners, and the specific sound of something that was not quite a laugh, but was warmer and more private than one. He folded it again carefully and put it back. Then he took out the page from the notebook, her handwriting, the two route lines, the station points, the one intersection, and held it for a moment before folding it with the same care and returning it to the same pocket. It occurred to him that he was now carrying, in the inside pocket of his jacket, a more organized account of the next 8 weeks than he had managed for most of the previous 4 years, which was either a comment on his planning or on hers, and he was fairly certain which. Outside the porthole window, Orvon Station was doing what stations did from departing ships, shrinking, becoming geometrical, losing its internal complexity and resolving into shape and light, and then into something smaller against the dark. He watched it go with the attention of someone marking a thing, not dramatically, but precisely, the way his father had marked coastlines. The transport's navigation system announced their initial heading in the calm, informational tone of software that had made peace with the fact that no one was particularly listening. Marin Outpost, 11 transit hours, with a brief deceleration window at the Pelion Corridor junction that Daniel noted with the professional reflex he couldn't turn off. The junction infrastructure was due for reinspection, and he had notes about its pressure coupling tolerances from his last pass that he had intended to flag and had not yet flagged, and he made a note now, because some habits were load-bearing and should not be examined too closely. He opened his work log on his display panel. He looked at the circuit map, the fixed points and the variable 30%, and the long arc of the next 4 months laid out in the transit authority's preferred formatting, which was functional and entirely without personality. He looked at where Deliv Prime sat on the map in the belt, 8 weeks out by conservative estimate. Then he did something he had not done to his circuit map before. He took out his pen, physical, a habit from his father's house, a preference his colleagues also found archaic, and he made a small mark next to Deliv Prime. Not an official notation, not a routing flag, just a mark, the kind you make when something on a map is no longer abstract. The Drivari beside him shifted in sleep and made a sound of profound, unconscious contentment. Across the aisle, the researchers had reached a temporary ceasefire, and were both staring at their respective screens with the exhausted concentration of people who would resume the argument in approximately 20 minutes. The transport moved through its initial acceleration phase with the smooth, reliable competence of something that had made this run many times and knew the way. Orvon Station was gone from the window. The dark had closed over it the way the dark closed over everything eventually, patient and absolute, and the stars were back in their positions, the same stars, from a slightly different angle now, the small shift in perspective that came from having moved. Daniel thought about what she had said about logistics and feeling things, the order of them, the preference for sorting the practical before allowing the rest. He had spent 4 years sorting the practical exclusively, and leaving the rest in a category he checked on infrequently, the way you check on a plant you are not sure you are keeping alive. He thought about a woman who distributed 200 flyers with the focused calm of someone who had decided that clarity was kinder than ambiguity, and had revised the document 4 times to make sure it was right, and had sat in the same bad coffee cafe for 11 mornings because the pressure was more stable near the east wall, and had put her remaining flyers away without announcement in a corridor junction, and said nothing about it because she understood that some things communicated more cleanly without words. He thought about a notebook page folded in his inside pocket next to a flyer. 2 documents, one that had started something and one that had mapped where it might go, both worn at the crease now, both kept. He picked up his display panel and opened a new communication on the 3rd network. He thought for a moment about what to write, and then he thought about how she asked questions directly, without ornament, genuinely interested in the answer, and he decided to try it her way. The coffee on the transport, asterisk he wrote, is worse than Orvon's. I didn't think that was possible. I want you to know that I hold the scheduling algorithm personally responsible for all of this. He looked at it. He sent it. He put the panel down and looked out the porthole at the dark and the stars and the slow, certain movement of the transport carrying him along the first leg of a circuit that had, as of this morning, acquired a point on it that was no longer abstract. 8 weeks was not a long time in the way that transit routes measured things. It was not a short time in the way that mornings in cafes measured things. It was a specific amount of time that two people with notebooks and worn-creased documents and a shared low opinion of station coffee had looked at together and decided was workable. The display panel lit softly in his peripheral vision. He looked at it. The scheduling algorithm, asterisk she had written, has a documented error rate of 47% on connector routes. You are statistically likely to be affected eventually. I would have mentioned it earlier, but it didn't seem relevant at the time. A pause, then 8 weeks. I've updated the buffer to 46 hours. The relay infrastructure apparently had maintenance last month. I found the report this morning. He read it twice, not because he had misread it. He looked out the window at the stars, at the dark between them that was not empty but full of the distances things crossed to reach each other, at the slow and patient math of orbits and schedules, and the 30% of a route that had room to move. He wrote back, conservative estimates. She wrote, they have a better completion rate. He put the panel down and folded his hands, and settled into his seat the way you settle into something when you have stopped being in transit and started, quietly, to be somewhere. And the transport carried him forward through the dark toward Marin Outpost and the belt, and a point on a map that had a small pen mark next to it now. And the stars held their positions, and 8 weeks moved steadily, in the manner of all time that is being looked forward to, toward becoming now.